Let's explore all the endings of the Italian nation and I'll give you some backstory as to how these could have happened. Usually, these types of videos don't have any commentary, but I decided to change that. First, we have one of the most realistic options, where Italy receives the lands it was promised after the First World War. The Entente promised to Italy that it could have South Tyrol, Istria, Dalmatia, and a protectorate over Albania. Out of these promises, only the first two were fully fulfilled. This angered the Italian nation, who felt betrayed by their allies, allowing for an ultra-nationalist coup to take place. If Italy had received what they wanted in the first place, I doubt that this guy would rise to power. This is important since it would result in Italy most likely not joining Germany in the Second World War. It's unknown how the Second World War would look like without Italy working with Germany. Perhaps the Italians protect Austria from German aggression. This would result in the war starting a bit sooner. Perhaps the Stresa front gets formed against Germany. I made this prediction in the video on the screen. Make sure to watch that if this topic sounds interesting to you. Either way, the borders of Italy would be a bit bigger, where they would include most Italian-speaking lands. An alternative of Italy joining the Entente in the First World War is them joining the Central Powers. The Italians already were in a defensive alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary when the war started, so this is a possibility. Italy and Austria had disagreements over South Tyrol, Istria and Dalmatia, so an alliance between the two was impossible. For Italy to join the Central Powers, Austria-Hungary needs to give up some of their lands to Italy. This is due to the Entente of France and Britain promising Italy these lands if the Italians joined them. Italy would be guaranteed these lands, but the Central Powers would promise them control over Savoy, Nice, Corsica, Malta and Tunisia. We will also assume that the Central Powers perform a bit better in this war, where Austria-Hungary is a bit more competent against Russia and Serbia. Italy joining the Central Powers perhaps is not enough for their faction to be victorious. There needs many changes to be done so that we can ensure that. Since this video is focused on Italy, I will not explore this scenario. In the end, Italy would end up looking like this, with France and Britain most likely becoming ultra-nationalist and would try to destroy Italy. We cannot know for certain if Italy would survive in this shape or form or not, so I will not explore this scenario further. Moving to the next scenario, where Italy and the Axis are victorious in the Second World War. These borders look a lot like the Central Powers victory scenario, but this is to be expected. In this scenario, Italy would work with Germany against France and Britain, so it's expected the borders to look similar. There are a few differences however. This is for the Italian parts of Switzerland, mostly the Ticino canton, falling under Italian occupation. It's somewhat possible that Germany forces Italy to give up control over most of South Tyrol due to many Germans living there. Other than that, Italy would grow even more at the expense of Yugoslavia and France. I assume that they will have a protectorate status over Greece, with the Italians maybe controlling Corfu and Crete. Maybe Yugoslavia is partitioned, with Italy having a protectorate over Montenegro as well. Finally, the Italians would expand their Albanian holdings, by giving them Kosovo province in former Yugoslavia. These borders are too wild, and I don't see the Italians keeping most of them. I assume that Italy would lose a lot in upcoming wars and rebellions, so their borders would end up looking like the Central Powers victory, but with the Swiss parts. Moving to the Napoleonic Wars, if France was victorious, then Italy would remain occupied by Napoleon's dynasty. I will not spend the time theorizing on how Napoleon could have won, since I already made this video on that topic. So, we would have France being victorious in the Napoleonic Wars. This would result in Italy most likely not uniting fully, or it would take a lot of time. Even if Italy unifies, France would still control the provinces of Sardinia, Piedmont and Lombardy. Perhaps, just like with Napoleon III, France would become a protectorate of the Catholic nation of the Papal States. This leads me to think that Italy would be fully unified only with French consent, but still, France would occupy out of Italy. Eventually, Italy would gain control over the Papal States, as well as Lombardy. The Napoleonic Wars would be very bad for Italy, but there is a lot worse scenario for them coming up. Before we get to the worst Italian scenario, let me explore how they would be at their greatest. This would be if the Roman Empire never fell. Now, this is extremely unrealistic, but the Roman Empire was also very stable. I would suggest that they don't expand for a while, so they don't suffer from expansion fatigue, something that most likely killed them from within. Also, the empire must not be split up into Eastern and Roman Empire if they wanted to remain united. After the Roman Empire stabilizes, they would be ready to expand even more. Eventually, they would reach the Baltics, where they would colonize the coastline, just like they did with the Mediterranean Sea. An interesting scenario is them enough surviving long enough so they can fight the Mongol Empire. This becomes too hypothetical and impossible to tell for certain. It's a cool idea to think about. According to my YouTube poll, 1000 of you guys think that the Mongol Empire would come out on top. Either way, if history has taught us anything, then we all know that all empires must come to an end. This would also apply to the Roman Empire. The downfall would be delayed by many centuries, so the Apennine Peninsula, the center of the Roman Empire, would be the most developed. This means that the rest of the empire collapses, but the Apennine Peninsula gets to live on and does not collapse immediately. I assume that an Italian nation would look like this after the collapse of the Roman Empire, where they would gain and lose some lands from time to time. The final borders would be impossible to predict, so I would go with these borders for a Roman Empire Italy. Let's go to the Second World War, where if the Rome Protocols were formed, Italy would survive and thrive after the Second World War. The Rome Protocols were an international agreement between Italy, Austria and Hungary, signed in 1934 in Rome. The Rome Protocols aimed to secure economic development between these countries involved, but also to combat the aggressive policies of Germany. In our timeline, the Rome Protocols were short-lived, due to Italy invading Ethiopia, where they were kicked out from the League of Nations. France and Britain also drifted away from Italy. This left Italy isolated, so they decided to ally with Germany, because the Germans were also internationally isolated. Italy allowed Germany to annex Austria, which put an end to the Rome Protocols. What if all that changed, and Italy managed to expand the Rome Protocol signature countries? Since Italy's goal of the Rome Protocols was to limit German expansion, when the Italians became isolated, it only makes sense for them to ally with other countries in Europe. This would include them having good relations with Poland and Czechoslovakia, but they wouldn't sign the Rome Protocols, at least not initially. The countries that would sign would be Bulgaria and Albania. This is due to Romania protecting Greece and Yugoslavia. These two countries would prefer to be allied with Romania rather than Italy, for now. Germany would try to annex Austria, but they wouldn't be successful, due to Italy defending their ally. I assume that Czechoslovakia would at this point sign the Rome Protocols, due to them having a large German minority. Germany would most likely still invade Poland, with the allies of France and Britain joining the war against Germany. The Italians would decide to invade Yugoslavia, where Romania would also protect the Slavic state. Ultimately, I assume that both Yugoslavia and Romania would fall. This wouldn't be as easy as I make it seem. Billions would die, but ultimately Italy would have the upper hand. This would result in Italy gaining Dalmatia, Montenegro and expanding their Albanian holdings. Hungary would gain Vojvodina and Transylvania, with Austria gaining a bit of Slovenia. Bulgaria would gain Macedonia from Yugoslavia, with the rest being split up into a Serbian and a Croatian state. We will assume that Italy doesn't join the Second World War, or they join during the end against Germany. This would slightly expand Czechoslovakia, where they would most likely gain Silesia. On the other hand, what if Italy was occupied after the Second World War, just like Germany and Austria initially? This means that France, the United Kingdom, the United States and the Soviet Union would have zones of occupation in the country. To do that, the Soviet Union would need to be a bit more effective, or the Germans need to not perform so well. This would ensure that the Soviet Union reaches northern Italy. This is fairly realistic due to the Soviet Union being close to Italy. If the Soviets reach most of northern Italy, this means that they would get a lot bigger pie of Austria and Germany in the process. Let's assume that the provinces of South Tyrol, Friuli Venezia Giulia, Veneto, Lombardia and Emilia-Romagna would fall under communist rule. They would be stitched together in what would be called Northern Italy, or officially Italian Democratic Republic. This nation would be doomed to fail. I would say that communism is literally the opposite of Italy. The Italian buildings look nice and some are hundreds of years old, while the Soviet buildings are meant for mass housing. Italy, looking like the Eastern Bloc, would be very cursed. Another thing we must consider is the Italian Catholics and the Church. It was prohibited to be religious in the communist world, so it would create problems for Italy. Although Poland, a deeply Catholic nation too, was able to survive this environment, most likely the north of Italy would do so as well. Down south, the British, French and American zones would merge to create the Republic of Italy, which is also called Southern Italy. The south of Italy is known to be poorer than the north. A big portion of Italian industry would be under the Soviet occupation, so the south would struggle and need financial support. This leads me to think that Italy would be screwed in this timeline, due to both the south and the north not being as successful as they would be if they were unified historically. The inevitable collapse of the Soviet Union would put an end to communism in northern Italy. The two republics would unite once again. As I mentioned, the GDP per capita of Italy would be really low, comparable to the Balkan countries. Just so you know, these are the videos that I will be uploading very soon, so subscribe if you don't want to miss any of them out. Now, back to the video. Another alternate World War II ending is based around the Italian institutional referendum of 1946. There, the people voted if they want Italy to become a republic or a monarchy. The vote was very close, with 54.3% of voters choosing a republic, with the rest, 45.7%, choosing a monarchy. While the vote is close, it doesn't necessarily mean it would start a civil war. What is interesting, however, is that most of the people who wanted a republic were located in northern Italy, with the pro-monarchists residing in the south. Rome was especially split, with 49% wanting a republic and 51% wanting a monarchy. The voting system was universal suffrage, which means that everyone over the age of 18 could vote. I'm sure that if you change the voting system, the monarchist party would come out on top. If this ends up happening, the North would protest and demand that they hold the referendum again. Tensions with the South would rise. Soon after that, an Italian civil war would begin, where Republicans and monarchists would be fighting. The Soviet Union wouldn't support the monarchists, because their ideologies don't align. If the Republicans embrace communist ideas, then the USSR could intervene. The Italian Republicans, however, were anti-communist, so the USSR wouldn't intervene in the civil war. The United States, as well as all the Western countries, might intervene to help the Republicans. Either way, if they do or not, it wouldn't really matter. If the South is conquered, they would never be integrated. They would just cause more problems and constantly rebel. This leads me to think that Italy would be eventually split up among North and South lines. This would remain up until the modern day. The south of Italy would have a harder time, due to the region being historically poorer compared to the north. Either way, two Italys is always better than one. What is better than two Italys is having like 10 of them. This is how the Apennine Peninsula used to look like after the Napoleonic Wars in 1815. In our timeline, Sardinia-Piedmont managed to unite all of Italy by invading Austrian Lombardy-Veneto with French support. Sardinia-Piedmont gave up the provinces of Annay, Savoy, and Nice to France as compensation for the French helping Italy unite. Giuseppe Garibaldi had an expedition where him and his troops single-handedly managed to overthrow the government of the two Sicilies. Giuseppe Garibaldi didn't want to proclaim himself king. He also valued Italian unity, so he gave the whole territory of the two Sicilies to Sardinia-Piedmont. Italy was almost united, but the Papal States controlled Lazio province, where Rome was located. France was protecting the Catholic nation of the Papal States, so Italy couldn't just invade without having to fight France as well. Luckily for the Italians, Prussia attacked France and the French garrison in the Papal States left. This paved the way for Italy to invade and annex the Papal States. What if all of that changed and Italy never unified? This can be achieved with an alternate Congress of Vienna peace treaty, where Italy is carved up. The Kingdom of Aragon used to rule the two Sicilies, so let's say that their successor, Spain, gets to rule the two Sicilies as well. The United Kingdom would get a protectorate in Sardinia, with the rest of Italy being split up as they were historically. These small changes would make it impossible for Sardinia-Piedmont to unify all of Italy, even with French support. This is because, to unify all of Italy, they would need to defeat Austria, Spain, and the United Kingdom, as well as some smaller states like the Papal States and Tuscany. Eventually, Lombardy-Veneto would gain their independence from Austria, perhaps after the Brothers' War between Austria and Prussia. Maybe Lombardy-Veneto gets split up into Lombardy and Venice. The two Sicilies would gain their independence from Spain, with the same happening in Sardinia. No nation in the Apennine Peninsula is strong enough to form Italy, so the peninsula would remain divided up until something changes. Perhaps, as time goes on, some regions would choose to unify, but there would be a lot more Italian states. Going back to the world after the Napoleonic Wars, what if another state rather than Sardinia-Piedmont unified Italy? In the case of Catholic Italy, the Papal States would form Italy. This would be simply achieved by Sardinia-Piedmont losing many times to Austria, even with French support. After the Brothers' War between Austria and Prussia, Lombardy-Veneto would gain their independence. The Papal States can either invade or influence the new nation. Garibaldi's expedition to the two Sicilies would also take place, where he would take over the nation. Since he wanted a unified Italian state, but there was no contender at that time, he would give these lands to the Catholic Church. After this, the Papal States would influence and invade other smaller states, where they would be able to completely unite all of the Apennine Peninsula. The government of Italy would be very different, with the Pope being directly in charge. I'm not so sure what would happen having this in mind. Perhaps the Catholic nations unite or something else changes. I also don't know what would happen during both world wars, so please let me know in the comments down below. What do you think would happen in this situation? I reply to every comment I get, so I advise you to leave one. If you follow me for a while, you will know that I made a video on what if San Marino formed Italy, instead of Sardinia-Piedmont. I explored a very interesting scenario where San Marino works with Napoleon Bonaparte during the Napoleonic Wars, requesting territories. To see the entire video, please click on the screen right now. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.